What is up, guys? I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And this is the Meaning of Podcast, the podcast where we talk about your favorite filmmakers and the deeper meaning within their films. And once again, we are not doing a filmmaker. RB3 came up with this brilliant idea to celebrate, obviously, Juneteenth. The history of Black cinema is so important right now. And talking about it, I feel like, is kind of the best thing we can do, especially during this Black Lives Matter movement. So I want to toss it over to you, RB3, because I know you did a video essay on this, and this is something you're passionate about.
Black cinema is like an especially important topic to me because I think, you know, when you look at like all of the totality of representation throughout what we see from the very early days of blackface, of, you know, Black characters playing like mammies and slaves, to where we progress now to seeing something like Black Panther or all of these really amazing, you know, very empowering types of films that we're seeing right now. It's a good evolution, but you know, it does in some ways also reflect how the changing attitude has kind of occurred throughout Hollywood in relation to Black actors and the Black audiences as well. In the beginning, there was a complete disregard for African Americans in the cinemas because there was complete segregation. And in a post-segregation world, you know, movies about issues, movies about problems ended up rising into more popularity in studio productions. And then from that point, you know, you start seeing blaxploitation, which was outright, which some people saw as empowering and other people didn't. But then it leads to a whole shift in our belief in where Black stars and Black actors could go in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and 2010s. So it just really is really interesting to me. I think this is an ideal time to talk about, especially on Juneteenth, which I think personally should be a national holiday. You know, especially if we're celebrating 4th of July. There was independence for America, but there was never independence for African Americans in this country. So Juneteenth is really a day that we could start to use to represent that. But, you know, I think especially on a day like today, it's important to talk about the filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux, who was like the first African American filmmaker who was such an independent guy. He literally carried his films, you know, under his arms and took them to cinemas to show them in Black cinemas. And that really paved the way for, you know, people that we know now, like Ryan Coogler, you know, like a Tyler Perry, like a Spike Lee, like everybody who is basically shaping Hollywood, Donald Glover. There wouldn't be any of that without understanding the history. So I just think it's a great time to talk about it.
Yeah. Sabrina?
Definitely. I agree. I think film in general is supposed to be kind of like a reflection of the world. And what we see a lot, especially like growing up, we just don't have the diversity that we actually see outside of our windows, outside when we're going to stores. And so talking about this kind of stuff is so important because it's insane to look back on history in all different aspects. It's insane to see how far we've come and then also realize that it wasn't even that long ago. So how little progress has been made throughout that time. And to think about Halle Berry and her experience as an actress, and she's still a working actress and she's still very young right now. So the fact that she was like the groundbreaking first like Black woman to ever win an Oscar is absolutely insane because it wasn't that long ago. And the fact like how little we've done from that point even till now is insane. And it really is crazy because we have these names that are coming out and they're amplifying voices. We talk about diversity constantly. When we talk about the Oscars, we do it. When we reflect on everything, we have talked about diversity because it's such an important topic in all different aspects. But of course, we talk film. And so to see people amplifying these voices, like what Jordan Peele's doing with his career right now, he took his name, he changed, and I know we'll get into all this later, but it is something that is so inspiring because he is using the platform that he created. Get Out came out just a few years ago, and the kind of brand change he made from Key and Peele to that and the change he made in his career and how he's using it to uplift other voices like Nia DaCosta with Candyman, things like that. It's important to talk about because it's not over. There still needs to be way more diversity, way more everything. So as we go through this history, it's something to celebrate when it's the great achievements, but it's just a reminder that there's so much more in terms of diversity in entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there is a long history, RB3, because it's the history of America, right? One of my favorite lines of Be Water, the documentary of Bruce Lee, was when he said Hollywood is racist because America is racist. And it's a reflection of what America is, which is why diversity is so important, and which is why, frankly, I'm in Hollywood, because I'm very passionate about Latinos in cinema and the fact that we don't get any proper representation or representation at all. So this is something that is a continual cycle of how we reflect our own humanity, our own society, is what we see in the cinema. And the fact that there has been this long history of the poor reflection of African Americans getting the jobs that they have and the working gigs that they have be usually stereotypes and be usually a negative reflection, or some way to help a white person, because that's usually what it was, is just another example of how much we have to overcome. And frankly, how long ago did The Help come out? How long ago did all these movies come out that are kind of similar in the narrative structure that movies that came out in the 1950s and the 40s?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's what's, kind of fascinating to think about, especially when you think of cinema as a whole, right? I mean, film is really relatively the youngest art form that's ever come into existence. I mean, if you want to get into a more technical argument, you can maybe say video games are, but in terms of like an established, like big form of art and media, movies really only existed for about 120 years. Back in like 1890 is when we first started seeing cinema come into what we know it as today. So we really don't have so about 130 years. So it's really younger than America, essentially. So they're definitely, when we're asking for Hollywood to catch up and for Hollywood to be more understanding of the plights of different races, different backgrounds, and different ethnicities, it's because if it's not reflected in America, we at least expect it to be reflected in our escape, right? In our means of enjoyment and entertainment. So that is, I think, the biggest reason why, we see stars like Sidney Poitier become massive stars back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. He won, I believe he won about 2 Oscars, if I'm not mistaken. And was nominated many times. But, and, not to mention in more today's era, Denzel, like, we appreciate those type of performers because they really paved the way for a lot of other younger actors to come in. Without a Sidney Poitier, there wouldn't be a Denzel. Without a Denzel, there wouldn't be a Chadwick Boseman. Without a Chadwick Boseman, there probably wouldn't be the next great actor or performer. So all of that matters, and all of that trickles down to how better our system's going to be, how much more we're going to be reflected towards audiences. And, and when audiences get to look at bigger figures, even outside of actors, when it's superheroes like Black Panther, we get to look to something, aspire to something that's greater than the conditions that we're living in this country. It's aspiring and it's aspirational, and it's something that can inspire a new, younger generation, troubled or not troubled, privileged or unprivileged, to maybe do something greater. So I think that's why diversity is important and representation is important, and having this evolution of Black cinema being such an important conversation that I think the world needs to discuss.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about a little bit about the history of it. Obviously, one of the biggest things that was a hindrance towards this was segregation, right? I mean, the idea that we lived in America where segregation was just a normal part of a daily structure if you're an African American living in a segregated community. Talk to me about that and the idea of movie theaters kind of being segregated as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, movie theaters amongst many institutions in this country was highly segregated, and even back in, but it was a different time in certain eras, in certain places and communities like Tulsa, Oklahoma, before the massive Black Wall Street terror attack that happened, during in that time period. Before then, in certain towns and certain areas, and we even see that in Watchmen, they have black movie theaters and black cinemas that fully supported black neighborhoods and black areas, that, you know, represented some sort of wealth or represented some sort of upper class in this country. But eventually, you know, when it came to areas in the South and areas less integrated across the country, there was not opportunities for not having movie theaters that can have both white and black people in it. You know, some theaters used to have like the upper balcony be the black only section and the lower balcony be the white only section. But even in that had forced the hand of black creators to have to go outside of the system and work independently. And that's why I speak highly on Oscar Micheaux, who I speak about in my video essay. I'll put the link in the description down below. But I did that video essay when I was in 10th and 11th grade. And it's all about how Oscar Micheaux was really the first African-American filmmaker, because of how much of a pioneering mentality was necessary in order to make that break outside of the system. There was no studio financing those kinds of movies. The only times when studios started financing black cinema in and of itself was blaxploitation. And it really comes down to Shaft, which came out in 1971. That was Warner Brothers who did that. And that was actually the first studio funded blaxploitation film. And it was directed by Gordon Parks, who's like this historic African-American filmmaker. He's a filmmaker and a photographer, but he was known for his photography mostly during that time. It really culminated into, you know, what some people consider good stereotypes and some people consider bad stereotypes. But it's, you know, as compared to and you know, even though the bad stereotypes are violent, hyper misogynistic, all that kind of like over sexualized stuff that's represented in blaxploitation, it was significantly better than the rural kind of toxic, disgusting, negative stereotypes that were portrayed in films like Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, I mean, there's a conversation to be had. Obviously, we have to talk about Gone with the Wind because it is in recent news right now. HBO Max recently took it down last week. First of all, I want to get your thoughts on that, Sabrina, the idea of taking it down and the idea of kind of realizing the historical significance of this movie and the kind of themes and messages that it delivers.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough situation. I feel like it goes from film to film because this has happened kind of some of the stuff with like Disney Plus as well. That's been in the conversation. But I feel like if there is a piece of art, it doesn't matter how celebrated it was at the time. I feel like if it doesn't hold up today, you should be able to admit it doesn't hold up. They can take it down. I'm fully on that side of if it has depictions that are stereotypical that could like incite some like prejudice. If children are watching Gone with the Wind, you don't want them to take something negative out of it. Show them something else that'll show like a positive reflection of actually what life is. It just doesn't really make sense to me that it's kind of an argument that people don't understand. It's like censoring and things like that and people being sensitive and snowflakes. And that's just not really the topic. I feel like that should be at hand. It should be about just respecting one another. And if something is harming the image of a certain group of people, then it should be taken down and it should be dealt with in that way. Because I feel like that's just the only way that makes sense.
Yeah. What do you think, RB3?
Yeah, I mean, I similarly agree. I think that, you know, people don't really, if you haven't really watched Gone with the Wind in like the last, 10 years, I guess you're not picking up on the idea that it's literally about Confederate apologists. So it's like, I don't think it really has a place in this era. I don't think most people even want to watch Gone with the Wind anyway. I mean, that's like a 3-hour and 40-minute like mess anyway. So I don't think it's even worth watching. I'm not going to lie. When I first saw HBO Max, I kind of wanted to watch it just for the sake of looking at it from, the perspective, that I have now and everything that I understand about what's happening in our world and the basis of our cinema and whatnot. But I do think it's kind of, I mean, it came out in 1939 and it definitely shows you the mindset of the country during that time period, which is really the most disappointing part because that was merely 80 years ago. pretty much 81 years ago. So to know that there was a sympathetic kind of idea that this is how we could look at just Black people and Black audiences and just say this is okay, this is kind of stuff that can be condoned, especially to the point where it was so condoned and so accepted that it was not only the highest grossing movie at that time, not the highest grossing movie like ever according to inflation, but it also won the first African American Academy Award. That's how much this movie was seen as like doing the right thing back then. So it's like that kind of acknowledgement really is kind of saddening and sickening, but it does show you, I mean, you know, even though it was a Black woman playing a mammy, at least it was better than somebody in blackface, you know, shooting trying to shoot a white person or rape someone. Rape a white woman. Yeah, that we see in a lot of that early propaganda cinema.
Yeah, it's something to be told and it's something to be talked about, because I think there's this interesting conversation that's being had now between media, obviously cinema, because I think cinema plays a huge hand, but I'm also a big sports fan, as you can see by my son's hat. And the idea of how sports also plays an angle to all this. And obviously music, there's a whole conversation to be had about music, how that plays an angle to all this. But the idea that the current president is tweeting about this, he actually tweeted about Gone with the Wind and called it disgraceful that they're taking it off and all this kind of stuff, shows you that there is this kind of active suppression of Black people. And there's this active a group of people who really want to go out of their way to make sure you stay in your place. And it's that idea that's why cinema is so important, because it can amplify a different voice to a different community. I've always talked about the idea of showing communities, not just communities that you love and not just your own community, but homies in Wisconsin, homies who've like never seen anyone else besides white people, a good portrayal of an African-American person, a good portrayal of someone that they might not, know that well as far as a community member. But when you see the racial stereotypes and you constantly are thrown that in your face growing up with it, it reinforces it. And if anything, it makes it worse, because that's why I feel like showing that kind of representation is very negative.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it goes back to the very DNA of what cinema is. And even though as much as we condone and disavow the messaging of the original film Birth of a Nation, which wasn't actively pro KKK, pro lynching essentially, during that time period, it was so celebrated that it went into the White House. It received a White House honor during the time it was out. So I want to keep emphasizing how problematic Birth of a Nation is because of how often it's taught in film school, frankly. If you go to film school, it is literally always shown as like an example of like this kind of cross-cutting dynamic. D.W. Griffith showed this amazing kind of new inventive technique to editing. That's always the narrative that perspirates from that discussion. But what never actually gets discussed is how much it almost disavows Black lives. And if you look at the data and the statistics, pretty much there was a large spike in white and lynchings committed by white supremacists after the release of that movie, because it was so sympathetic to it. So it's the importance of cinema is important, which is why I think, and between 1915 and 1952, there was about like 500 quote unquote race pictures that were produced like throughout, all various types of studios and whatnot. But we really start to see changes when we really start to see changes in the post 1970s, 1980s world, where Black filmmakers were starting to get actual acknowledgement behind the camera, leading to actual kind of revolutionary ideas coming through in today's era. So for me personally, like, I think that should be more celebrated than the problematic old 100-year-old movie, just because it had some good cross-cutting in it.
Yeah, and it brings up the conversation, obviously, of blaxploitation that I feel like I want to jump into, and I'm going to toss it to you, Sabrina, because obviously I want to get your thoughts on the idea of playing into these type of exaggerated roles, because when you're an actor, a lot of what you do is obviously based on income, right? Where you are realizing that, hey, I have to pay rent, I have to take care of my family. These are the kind of roles that I'm taking on. Should I keep doing it? And the idea as well that blaxploitation, the reason why blaxploitation was a thing was because of money, right? It was making money. That's why people wanted to keep doing it. They were like, oh, damn, these actually make bank. Let's keep making these blaxploitation movies. But I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on that and the idea of blaxploitation in general.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it is very heavy with its stereotypes, but it's kind of what broke everything out. It's when people were getting the green light to make these types of films and getting like their names. And we had, because I'm not so familiar with blaxploitation films myself, like I haven't seen too many, but one thing that I really loved seeing on screen was Dolomite Is My Name from last year, which covers kind of his experiences and how it was like he wasn't getting a chance at all the different types of arts he was trying to do. He was trying to be a musician, and then he went into film, and his journey throughout that, and kind of the fun they had making it, and then how it blew up and it became a thing. And of course, Eddie Murphy's playing Dolomite, and it's kind of like a legend in Hollywood for what he did. It's really great. But yeah, it's kind of like the only thing I can really relate it to, because obviously these don't align with my experiences, is seeing like Latin representation on screen, and how like if you see like a Mexican in a movie, he's like a thug. Like they have that one actor that's like Hector, and he just plays like thug Hector in every movie. And it's where, yes, Hispanic people are getting roles, but if it's saying in a similar vein, what is it doing? So it's kind of like a really great conversation of back and forth that I don't quite know the answer to, but I would love to hear RB3 kind of break it down for me.
Well, yeah, and to kind of, before you go in, RB3, the idea of leading roles, right? Because I think that's the difference between the Latinos, because the Latinos don't have leading roles. But the idea of leading roles, and you said there's a negative aspect to this and there's a positive aspect to this as far as reaction. What is your own reaction?
Mine.
No, RB3, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective of it, again, is significantly better than what we've seen before in the past, and I think that's why people attach themselves to it. I think a lot of people who grew up, even a lot of people who were inspired to do like 90s hip hop, you know, like we literally see like Foxy Brown take her name, her rapper name from the movie Foxy Brown, stuff like that. But it became such an inspiration to this really kind of rebellious movement in Black cinema that really started a launching pad for seeing other kinds of portrayals on screen and getting other support, especially from a studio standpoint. You know, again, Sidney Poitier did a great job of getting the representation on a kind of more professional, classy front. You know, when he did movies like A Raisin in the Sun or Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or all these other. He did a few other movies like the. I want to say Mississippi. It's something. It's a Mississippi set movie. But yeah, I overall though I think that's why blaxploitation kind of had its own life outside of that kind of more sophisticated type of acting and entertainment. Blaxploitation served to be a little bit more violent, a little bit more exploitive. And that's what the subgenres of exploitations are. The exploitation subgenre is in general. When you think about like low budget sci-fi, or low budget horror, I think is probably the best example. I think that'll probably be the best relation to probably a lot of what we see in cheap, low budget entertainment that satisfied its audience, didn't necessarily get the best critical acclaim, but ended up serving his base and serving his audience. And to some extent, I don't want to say what Tyler Perry does is exactly blaxploitation, but it's the same kind of idea of like directly targeted marketing. And if that, even if the outside world might not have the most positive perception of it, even though the outside world might not have the most positive perception from watching that, it does speak its own language to its community. So on that level, I can appreciate it. However, I don't stand by a lot of what blaxploitation movies sometimes encourage, like in terms of sexual assault, sexual violence, actual black on black violence. But I think what was powerful about the blaxploitation genre is that there's always this archetype of the man versus the individual and the man standing up to the system. And and blaxploitation, there's always the white boss who is the white guy who's the main antagonist, is kind of the antithesis of like America and society in general. And that's why whenever people say, whenever you see a lot in Black language when we talk about like white people or white devils or the white man, is really servicing as an extension of this is our overall oppression that we've seen throughout this country, caused by white America, caused by America in general. So that's what I think was interesting about those films, is that they always had an archetype of representing that, as well as a funny little archetype of like a Black servant who always was like the bad guy's henchman. And there was always a face-to-face against the hero and the sidekick. And I think that's always a fun conversation too, because that is a level that we do see in Black society, as well as like the people who are going to stand on the side of the society and stand on the side of the government versus the rebel who's going to stand up against it. So in some ways, blaxploitation was its own version of revolutionary cinema. And even though it's not the most positive and most prettiest portrayal of African Americans and Black people in this country, I do think it at least served for some revolutionary purposes.
Yeah, and you brought up the fact of the representation that you got. I kind of want to toss it to something that you kind of briefly touched upon, and that's the idea of the hyper masculine aspect that we see. Obviously, I do want to talk about African American women as well, because that video you sent me was really interesting. And the idea of how it's a whole different thing when we talk about African American women to this day, right? And how they're poorly represented or just not even represented at all. But it kind of touches upon this whole blaxploitation hyper masculine era. What are your thoughts on that? And I also want to give Sabrina a chance to weigh in as well.
Yeah, there is a lot of hyper masculinity in the idea of like, it's this soul man action hero who has to go and have all of this, intercourse with all these different women and all this stuff and take out the bad guy. And a lot of stuff is unnecessary. Some of it actually promotes a lot of that like femme fatale stuff that we saw a lot in like early cinema, where there's always like the girl who's hooking up with the main hero, but she ends up being one of the bad guys or something like that. There's a lot of that trope too. But on the flip side of it, there are movies like Foxy Brown and Cleopatra that did actually have female stars and did put a strong representation of female women up on screen too, and almost kind of flipped it in the same extent. And they were kind of getting the same kind of treatment that the male stars were. So in some respects, there were, in a lot of respects for representation, it was not the most positive when it came to male figures or female figures. But at the same time, it did give a lot of roles to a lot of African-American stars like Pam Grier, who we saw evolve from that time. So on that level, it is interesting to look at. But at the same time, you have to be cautious about the messages you're promoting towards young people, essentially.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Sabrina?
Yeah, it's again with that, like, especially hearing RB3's perspective about it, it is really great. Things that came out of it just based on kind of Black people taking their own narrative, their own stereotypes, and doing it themselves. And it's almost like they're taking it back, and them having that like servant type of character kind of in it. But yeah, it goes to show that, gosh, just the past few years in general, with a lot of ways, there are just bad depictions, whether it's themselves just with the treatment of women and all of that, and how that does hold people back years. Mm-hmm. Like it truly does, because film is a reflection of our life, and people can be young and they can see that type of behavior and not really, I don't know. And I feel like, you know, the question you were asking before was kind of like the treatment before, you were saying about like Black actresses, before you asked RB3 the question. And it really is insane, because obviously at the beginning we listed off like Denzel, someone like Chadwick Boseman, and then we could talk about somebody who's like even newer, John Boyega, under 30, like and how that's all growing. But Black actresses, as we talked to Josh Trank about it a few weeks ago, just don't get the same treatment. And can even get like shunned for speaking about it. They can be like, oh, this person's difficult to work with, because it is insane to look back on the people we have, like Angela Bassett, Viola Davis, and how they don't get the same love that some of their white colleagues do. And it truly doesn't make sense, because they are two of the most talented actresses working today.
Yeah, and the part that it's part of cinema, right? It's the history of cinema. That's what the what is it called? The YouTube channel, Be Kind Rewind video talked about, the idea that since Gone with the Wind, that, you know, this is the kind of, that's the first Oscar. And then we go to Halle Berry, which we haven't even seen anything since Halle Berry to this day for Best Actress when it comes to a win for an Academy Award. The idea that this history of complete prejudice against specifically African-American women has this long history. And the fact that literally 2-3 weeks ago, we had Josh Trank on talking about the exact same thing. And that was like 2014, 2015. And the idea that this is a continual cycle of, like I said before, active racism towards African-American women. Active racism meaning they're going out of their way to purposely not include them.
It really, like, especially hearing him speak about it from an executive to him saying like, she is not marketable. We're going for big box office numbers. And the fact that we still have that in the conversation today is just completely, it boggles my mind, especially when that's not the case. That's not, like, having a Black Sue Storm is not going to change the film. It's not going to change the box office. It's not going to change anything like that. If anything, it's only going to make things better. It's only going to further push the fact that we can have a Black actress play a leading lady. Like, it just, it's insane.
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot about that show, Hollywood, that Netflix just did, right? And how it's kind of like this fantasy, almost like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood type of show that's like, here's a better reality that we can imagine. And there's the whole show is built around this kind of argument of whether or not they can make this movie centered around a Black actress, like if it'll be marketable. And in this fantasy Netflix, Ryan Murphy show, it's like, yay, we can do it, we can overcome. But the unfortunate reality is we've never been able to even come close to that, even today, even though that show was set in like the 1950s and it had all these colorful, fun characters. It's just really sad when you look at the reality of the situation, and that's nowhere near true. And I wish that more people would encourage, changing that. When we're talking about the Academy Awards, there was one instance that happened in the Academy Awards that I thought was rather fascinating back in like 1973, I think the year was, when both Cicely Tyson and Diana Ross were nominated for like Best Actress in the Leading Role, both in the same year. That was the first time and only time that two Black actresses were nominated for Best Lead Actress in the same year. And it's never happened again. And those are two of only a handful of lead actress nominations that Black actresses have ever received. So it's really crazy and fascinating to think about how little progress we're making in that front, even in modern Oscar conversations that we have. I even have a hard time when we're talking about the Oscar conversations for 2019 on this channel. There wasn't really any Black female actresses who were really put into the conversation for Best Lead Actress like during that time. So it's tough. It's just, it's the way the system is built up and how little and how underwritten Black women are in this industry.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on something that I didn't want to bring up, but I feel like we kind of have to bring up. And just because we're talking about African-American women, I'll connect it to this conversation. But if you take now the modern era, which eventually we will talk about after the break, what are your thoughts, RB3? And this is something that obviously Sabrina and I are not qualified to talk about. But even when we do get portrayals of African-American women, it's this whole, again, the light skin ideology that we get persistent in our face, which again goes all the way back to forever ago. But that idea of light skin, dark skin, talk to me a little bit about that, because it is real, and I feel like a lot of people might ignore it. A lot of people do ignore it, and it's an issue that has been brought up to me by a few of my coworkers. A girl that worked for me, her name was Ashley, gave me this really amazing speech about it, talking about the idea of African-American women and the dark skin effect. I believe it was the Nina Simone movie that was going to come out with Zoe Saldana that they were talking about. But that is a big issue, especially with African-American women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that is one of the kind of central conversations that kind of need to be had, is the idea of colorism and the idea of how much preference that these Eurocentric beauty standards have kind of had in our portrayal of African-American women on cinema. There's only been a handful of dark-skinned stars that you could really think of, like, in film, especially if, but I mean, there's, again, only a handful. And a lot of the people we're talking about are a lot of people, we've seen and recent and at least recent stardom too. I mean, it really doesn't even change almost, I feel like, because even when we talk about recent stars, like who's Zoe Kravitz, when we talk about the young lady from Spider-Man Homecoming, I forget her name.
Zendaya.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, and Zendaya, both of them.
I was going to say Zendaya.
Yeah, both of them.
But both of them, yeah. I mean, there's a certain kind of star, but you can't really name any dark-skinned actresses even today who resemble a darker complexion. To me, I always shout out Teyana Paris, who was in Chirac and who's in a bunch of stuff, across the board. And Spike Lee, I think, is one of the filmmakers who's done a really good job at putting dark-skinned women to the forefront. In today's era, especially shout out to Issa Rae. I think she's done a lot of great work with Insecure and kind of reforming the way that Black women and Black images are kind of represented on screen. And even going back to, I got to shout out this older film that, again, I learned in film school. Shout out to my History of International Cinema 2 class, 201, from this film called Black Girl, which is a debut feature from
Usman Simbin.
Was like a kind of like a social issues kind of drama that we saw in like American cinema, but it was from an African perspective, and and was very specific towards African culture when it came out in 1966. But I think that it did have this portrayal of a dark-skinned African woman that kind of highlighted a lot of what we see in today's cinema with people like Whoopi Goldberg, so kind of acting style and aesthetic kind of being highly influenced by the star of this film. And I'm going to really butcher names.
Mbisine Terrestia.
I do think that we see a few dark-skinned actresses throughout cinema, but it's usually put into supporting roles, comedic roles, or these really privileged and undesirable roles, like Gabrielle Sinebre with Precious. So yeah, it's a tough conversation to have. Colorism is a real issue, especially in media. Even when you think about in our geek community with X-Men, right? Like Storm is a dark-skinned African queen, and the only star in Hollywood they could cast, and that was Halle Berry, because that's all that was a prevalent star in that era. And today we got Alexandra Shipp, who's also still like on the fair side of complexion as compared to the dark-skinned drawings that we know of Storm. So it's really tough, and it's really sad. I hope we can overcome it one of these days. And I think it takes real women of color behind the camera, like Ava DuVernay, like Issa Rae, like Lena Waithe, to put a lot of those stars into prevalence and make action happen, that we could change that.
Yeah. Before we go to break, I want to get your thoughts, Sabrina.
Yeah, no, definitely. I obviously RB3 I kind of like echo everything he said. And even speaking of another one, even though I didn't really love the film necessarily for a few reasons concerning the script, I thought Queen and Slim was incredible just by the representation, what we saw on screen, because you see it's a road trip film and you get to see all these different cultures. You get to see everything that's happening in all different aspects of America. And also Jodie Turner-Smith and Daniel Kaluuya, two talented young actors that I know, like Daniel Kaluuya does get a lot of roles. We saw him do great in Widows, of course, and Get Out, which I know we'll talk
Oscar
about
nominated.
later. I know. We'll talk. I was saving it for later, but he was also great in Widows, and that's something that completely gets overlooked. And that's another thing. It's like, we'll talk about it in the second half, but Queen and Slim was something that I really loved for its representation, and that's the biggest celebratory thing I could come out of that film with, because they showed all these different aspects of America. They highlighted a lot of important issues, and Daniel Kaluuya and Jodie Turner-Smith together, incredible, and they deserve so many more roles than they're getting. Jodie Turner-Smith, I think she's kind of a newcomer. She completely knocked it out of the park. She did so great.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, guys, after the break, we're going to talk about modern cinema and how everything is evolving to now. So make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a bloodbath. You do the math, take you out the equation. This ain't funny, so don't you dare.
Check out this week's Netflix Roulette, where myself and Cade talk about the Spike Lee masterpiece, Malcolm X. Enjoy. You know, for as much as Spike Lee's a storyteller and he has style and has a lot of moments that are very reflective of like his cinematic kind of, flamboyancy, I think this movie also does a really good job of like honing in on the message of Malcolm X, honing in on the message of what he represented from the beginning, where he was beginning as with the Nation of Islam, and then his transformation and his pilgrimage and his journey and rediscovering what it meant to be a Muslim, and what it meant to be like a humanitarian, and to understand what unity represented. So it's an incredible journey. I mean, I think this is, again, like from a movie standpoint, like everything about this movie is just like absolutely perfect, like from the editing to everything about it, even like the behind the scenes story of like how they couldn't even like barely get it funded, so they had to go to different people and different celebrities to like raise money, like kind of in the way that independent cinema is now. So it's just a really beautiful summary and really beautiful narrative of the great leader that Malcolm X was.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We are back. Now I kind of want to touch upon something that you told me, RB3, and that's hip-hop cinema. Hip-hop has played a huge hand into, obviously, culture in general, and obviously movies is a part of culture. So talk to me about what happened, obviously, especially in the 90s when it comes to hip-hop.
Yeah, I think hip-hop served as a great integration into helping both. I think cinema both helped hip hop come into the mainstream, and cinema and hip hop helped cinema have a heavy influence into the Black community, and it starts to have a heavy influx of Black creators. And I think the two genres and two art forms kind of coalesced in a really beautiful way when you think about movies like Do the Right Thing, right? With Spike Lee's third motion picture, which, as opposed to a lot of Black cinema that we've seen pre-Spike Lee, a lot of Black filmmakers had a hard time with expressing stories and ideas that were not just about like troubling social issues or about Blaxploitation. But when Spike Lee came around, in this first film being She Gotta Have It, which is basically like a sex comedy, and then we have his second film, School Days, being a college comedy, drama, musical-esque type of thing, and Do the Right Thing being just this kind of like it does fit kind of squarely into the social issues lane, but it does it in the most creative and expressive way possible. And I think, when you look at the song, Fight the Power by Public Enemy being the main theme song of that movie. I mean, that song is played at least 30 times throughout that entire movie. And it's an important anthem that communicated the kind of rebellious message that movie instilled upon its release. Do the Right Thing was highly controversial when it came out. And a lot of people received a lot of negative press. A lot of reporters actually reported on thinking that was actually going to incite riots and violence and looting and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of funny seeing that and comparing it to hip hop's journey being the exact same way. How people thought hip hop and Black music was going to be something that incited riots and violence and uprising. And to some extent it did, but to the extent that, you know, is being overblown and over dramatized in the way that the news media likes to over dramatize any Black movement that happens in this country. I think that, you know, it's incredibly powerful to look at that link that cinema and hip hop has always had.
Yeah, it's incredible. Obviously, the history of hip hop and the idea of what the reaction was to it. I grew up in that era. Obviously, just so you guys know, and I grew up with this culture of hip hop in my family. I've talked openly about my brother being into hip hop, and that's kind of how he got his start. And me personally, I recorded tracks and did hip hop, and I've grown up with the idea of how other family members might be like, what is this rap stuff? And I openly promote it and rap and spit anytime I can in front of them to show them what it was. And I would blast that music every time when I was a kid. So yes, I do know this connection, and it really is absolutely fascinating how people reacting to this kind of music shows that integrated racism inside their own culture, their own upbringing, and inside themselves, frankly. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Sabrina.
Yeah. Speaking of Do the Right Thing, I mean, that's kind of a tale as old as time. Like, it's something that people reflect on a lot, that Spike Lee just won his first Oscar not too long ago. And the huge snub that came along with Do the Right Thing, the fact that it wasn't nominated. Roger Ebert, which I know you guys just did a throwback for episode of The Meaning Of, kind of talking about film criticism and highlighting that impact in him. He gave that a 4-star review, and he was just raving about it as all this other controversy is kind of happening in the background. And it really is insane that all of that controversy that comes out of music and comes with filmmaking sometimes dies down what it actually essentially is. All of this talk really goes over what the film is trying to say, the messages in the film, and then it's muddled with this bad perception, and it can hurt its chances at something like the Oscars. Do the Right Thing should have been nominated, should have won. Driving Miss Daisy won that year, and it's just something like people still talk about Do the Right Thing to this day, but I don't ever hear people talking about Driving Miss Daisy. And the fact that Spike Lee has been a veteran filmmaker making great films throughout his entire career, and that he is rarely ever celebrated into the amount. Like, I know we talked about his video from the Oscars when Green Book won, and he was just like, and they asked him his reaction. He was like,
"Not my cup of tea."
Yeah, he's like, "Not my cup of tea," and he deserves to be able to say that kind of stuff. And no, people were not really giving him scrutiny from that comment, because it's like, yeah, he's done his job very well for so long and hasn't gotten the recognition he deserved. He can say something like that. He can say a snarky comment because he truly deserves it. So then, you know, we have also like Ice Cube coming out of NWA and doing films like Friday and Boys in the Hood, and kind of the impact he had, because we see him now and he made a career change kind of with like Are We There Yet? And films like that. But seeing how he really brought that world of hip hop, a world that is so near and dear to him, and how he still to this day is always being an activist, is always at the forefront of all of this on social media and in real life, doing his part, because he grew up in that society and it was reflected in the films that he partook in the beginning of his career, not post rap, but after NWA.
Yeah, it's mind blowing to me what hip hop has come from and what it's become now. Obviously, when it's now pop, honestly, hip hop is now considered pop because of how literally popular it is. The idea now that you can pick a song, like even my dad said it the other day. We were watching this show where they pitch songs to people, and my dad was like, "Oh, wouldn't it be dope if they had like this rap verse right here?" And my dad said that, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, it actually would be dope," because now you can just add rap verses to songs, and that becomes the hip hop angle of a pop song, whether it's a Lady Gaga or any other pop star that could just have a feature from this rapper and just spit on it. It's just mind blowing to me, just because, again, I grew up with that 90s heavy pushback era where it was considered dangerous. And now it's just like my dad is like, yo, spit a track. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
But it's mind blowing to see that reaction. And to me, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, RB3, before we jump to modern times. The idea of how mainstreamized, I don't know if there's a word for it, hip hop has become. And yet we don't see that in film, right? I don't know if you disagree or agree, but I feel like hip hop has reached such an elevated genre of music to the point that it's so pop, and yet we still struggle to see proper representation in film.
Yeah, I mean, well, it kind of goes back and forth, right? I think as a result of Ice Cube's kind of rise to prominence, like Sabrina mentioned, and like, you know, Boys in the Hood and Friday and all these other movies that he participated in, we start to see the rapper turn to actor transition happen a lot back then. Like we started to see that happen with most notably, Tupac with Juice, and with the great collection of John Singleton movies that he did, Poetic Justice. And also I gotta shout out John Singleton too, because he is one of my biggest inspirations, because he was somebody who was from South Central LA, like I'm from Compton, right down the street. And he wanted to go to USC, same thing I wanted to do and study film. And he made his first film at 24. And he was the youngest. He was both the first Black Oscar nominee for Best Director and also the youngest. So he did a lot of revolutionary things. I want to say, you know, thank you and condolences. I know he passed away a little bit over a year ago. So, you know, rest in peace. And we had a great episode where we celebrated his work on the Meaning of Podcast. But yeah, I really you talk about Tupac making that rapper to actor transition. Will Smith is probably the biggest example, and that kind of leads into like the conversation we have about the 2000s, where I think, you know, Will Smith was one of the biggest stars in the world, because he had, you know, he was the clean cut rapper who was a little bit more commercially friendly. He didn't curse. He was the first rapper to ever win a Grammy. So then he went on to do network television with the Fresh Prince, and became a household family name, which cultivated him into being a big modern action star with things like Bad Boys and everything like that. So Will Smith's kind of journey is kind of impeccable too. And then it goes kind of full arc. Like now we're seeing the transition from, you know, these people who were rappers becoming actors, now becoming producers. Even going back to Ice Cube, you know, shout out to Ice Cube. He was an executive producer on the show Hip Hop Squares that I was like a PA for. And yeah, he was always on set, and he was like literally running the show. Like, and that's the kind of level of escalation that we need to see more happen throughout this industry. The way that Will Smith kind of executive produces everything he's involved in, everything he touches, like Bright, like, you know, he has a bunch of other stuff he's produced, even with his YouTube stuff. So it's a great evolution. I like seeing that, like, kind of coming from a more underground kind of background like hip hop, especially back in the 90s, to becoming like these mainstream forces. And I think it's all kind of going hand in hand. I think that's why hip hop is as mainstream as it is now, because of the transformation that a lot of these stars have made towards that. Snoop Dogg is another example of that too, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing that we had to talk about for sure. Hip hop has made so much changes now in cinema. It's crazy. I want to bring it to modern times, Sabrina, just because I feel like it's relevant. And obviously the 2000s, obviously we can brush over it with one clean stroke, in the sense of what I think to be a wrinkle in the waves that are happening now. And that's Moonlight. That whole 2016 Moonlight La La Land fiasco that happened on the Academy Awards. What do you think that impact was, and why do you think it was Moonlight that did it?
I feel like Moonlight is kind of an accessible film. It highlights a lot of really important themes, but in a way that, you know, when sometimes we see critics and we see people in the Academy openly speak about how they can't connect to a certain film because it's going after white people or it's doing any of that, Moonlight doesn't hit any of those kind of aspects. So that's why I feel like it's more accessible to those older kind of Academy voters. But also it does touch upon a lot of really, really important things. And Moonlight is a beautiful film and is so, so important. But then you look at something like Selma with Ava DuVernay, and that's the opposite. And that's why they don't connect with it and they don't give it the attention that it deserves, because we're seeing this story told in this way and people feel attacked and offended by our own history. Like, if you feel attacked and offended by our own history, then you're part of the problem. If you don't acknowledge and accept what happened and also celebrate the film efforts of Ava DuVernay and everybody involved of what they did with that film, and you decide just because of the story they're telling and what it portrays that it doesn't deserve to have the same recognition on the level that other films that year did, you're part of the problem. And so that's why Moonlight is kind of that accessible film where it doesn't necessarily do that. And I think it winning over La La Land is a huge deal, because La La Land is 100%, as much as we all love it, it's for sure, or as long as I know me and Andres love it. I don't know if
I do love it. I do love
okay.
it.
Loved it. He
I
put it
couldn't
in
remember.
one of his top movies, right?
Because I remember
Yeah,
I got into a fight with somebody on SEN and I couldn't remember who it was, but it must have been John Roca. And so I know we all love it, but it is for sure 100% Oscar bait. And if you look at the lineup of Best Picture nominees that year, you're like, La La Land. It just makes sense. So when they said it at the time I was watching live, wasn't surprised at all. And then when we found out it was actually Moonlight, first of all, two things. I don't know whether or not that was like real or if that was a setup. There's people that have like crazy theories.
I think it was a setup. I think
and that is so sad, because the winners, the filmmakers, all the people, the creators behind Moonlight had their freaking moment diminished by La La Land stealing the first half of it, thinking that they won. And yes, they got it. And yes, it's still a great accomplishment. But this is a huge moment, and people were just talking about the whole fiasco and the whole controversy more than they were talking about how important this really was, because this beautiful film that, first of all, has Black actors telling a Black story, and it's not any white savior, what we see with Green Book. It's none of that. It's an authentic story, and it also deals with homosexuality. And there's just so many things about this film that make it unique and make it so special and make it something that I know RB3 has mentioned, like they're going to teach it in film school from here on out. And that's really a beautiful thing. But yeah, it's just because it's more accessible, and that's not a detriment to Moonlight at all, but that's why it's Moonlight.
Yeah, we've talked about Moonlight a lot, RB3. Obviously, we saw it together. That was like one of the biggest movies we saw together. And we had conversations about it. And obviously, you've made this kind of arc about Moonlight. But it's interesting, the effect around it, because I do remember there was a conversation around Moonlight as far as the kind of portrayal they chose to show. And you can speak to that more than I can, obviously. Because of this conversation being had. But what do you remember from that? And obviously, what are your takeaways now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, going before kind of jumping into Moonlight, it's kind of important to recognize like the years that we've seen in like the Academy, like before leading up to Moonlight, right?
Of course,
the Oscars So White controversy being the biggest.
Yes.
And which
comes not directly, but it stems from Selma too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Selma's lack of representation. I think it was the 2015 Oscars for the movies that came out in 2014. Yeah, that was especially notable because the movie really only got nominated for Best Picture and Best Song. And so it's like, wow, the song was really great, but what about the rest of the movie? So it's really kind of unfortunate that that's kind of the position that we're kind of put in, like as consumers, frankly, and it's really demeaning. But it's kind of even sadder when you think about like back in like the earlier in the 2000s when we saw stuff like Jamie Foxx and Ray winning for best lead actor, and he was nominated the same year Don Cheadle was nominated for Hotel Rwanda, and actually Jamie Foxx was actually nominated twice that year. He was nominated for Best Lead Actor and Best Supporting Actor. Best Lead Actor for Ray, which he won, and Best Supporting Actor for Collateral with Tom Cruise, directed by Michael Mann. But he ended up losing Best Supporting Actor to Morgan Freeman for $1 Million Baby. So there was like a variety of African-American nominees.
Yes.
Like back then, you even go back to a couple of years before then, I think it was like 2002 when Denzel won his Oscar for Training Day, and then Sidney Poitier received his honorary Oscar, and Halle Berry won for Best Lead Actress. And so it seemed like, we're overcoming those problems early on, but then we kind of entered this like post-racial era that we kind of see now. And a lot of people kind of talk about this in various circles, both politically and from culturally and entertainment wise, how there's this kind of how when Obama was elected president, frankly, there's this whole idea that there was like the end of racism. Racism is over. Like the Academy is recognizing Black actors and actresses during that time. The president is Black. Like we're headed towards a place where racism is no longer a problem. But then after that era was over, and after we started seeing stuff like the ascendance of the rise of Trump and the ascendance of white supremacy kind of bring its ugly head back into the mainstream, our culture and our society kind of took a turn that prompted more response and more outrage for issues that kind of matter. So even though I think we saw a lack of representation in the Academy because we kind of ended up on this idea that like racism is over, everything's good, we don't have to worry about nominating Black people anymore because nobody's having that conversation anymore. But now that narrative has kind of changed, and now we are starting to understand the importance of recognition, the importance of representation. I think now that they're recognizing movies like Black Panther, If Beale Street Could Talk, and Moonlight is really awesome. I think Moonlight really set off the seal for that. Now, when we were talking about the conversation before about like how people responded to it, the way it was supposed to be represented, I remember when I first saw it, I thought it was going to be like some straight up like Boys in the Hood, like super hood, you know what I mean, kind of thing. But it turned out to be a much more artsy, much more introspective, kind of personal and intimate movie than I initially walked in expecting. I think that's why it garnered, like Sabrina said, a lot of accessibility, a lot of acclaim, because it had that like relatable factor. But I think for a lot of Black audiences, they kind of wanted to see something different, and they didn't want and it had a, for some Black audiences, it had a different kind of it was, it had this representation of poverty and still like this undermining kind of underprivileged perspective on the world that we have always seen throughout cinema. And I think people are just kind of expecting more, which is why I think we should celebrate movies like Black Panther. We should celebrate movies like Black Klansman and things that celebrate Black success and Black wealth and Black excellence, because that's something that we haven't seen in cinema for a long, long time.
Yeah, obviously there's been a lot of change and there's growing conversations, but I feel like it's conversations to be had. To kind of finish up, just because I want to make sure we finish on time. Let's talk about the responsibility factor versus the financial factor. This was touched upon on the Be Kind Rewind video. Shout out to them again. About the idea of proper representation and the idea of a paycheck and having a responsibility to yourself and to your rent and to your family versus having a responsibility to your people, and to the proper representation that you can see in Hollywood. I want to get your thoughts on that, Sabrina, because I do feel like it's a conversation to be had about just any race in general, right? Do you want to feed into any negative stereotypes?
I feel like if it's in the form of art, it's a different story. If you're an actress and you're casted in a role like in something like Moonlight and you want to show the poverty angle, like it's all up to you. But I feel like it shouldn't even have to like boil down to that. It's just give Black actresses, give Black actors the same like chances, like give them the same opportunities. It's not even like, it doesn't have to do with any of that. I don't understand how there can just be a normal American character that it has no indication. There's no thing to say this person has to be white. So why always cast a white person? We have amazing, talented actors coming. We have John Boyega just signed a deal with like Netflix, I think, or something like that. That's incredible because he was done really dirty. I know we love Star Wars, but he was done really dirty by Star Wars throughout this entire period because they took his face off the posters when they were marketing to China. Like all of that, they never really supported him when he was getting comments from, the toxic fans, things like that. So it's just giving people the same opportunities, always promoting diversity, because what we want to see on screen is what we see in our real life. And that's what's going to be the change. It doesn't always have to be some big profound thing. It's just the same opportunities. When we see something like A Girl's Trip, and then we see the other one that came out, that same year we had two.
Rough Night, I think it was
Rough Night, and Girls Trip did incredible. Rough Night didn't. That shows you right there. Like there's no need to be like, oh, Black women don't bring in box office. No, this was a great film that had great actresses and it did well. The other one, not so much. And it's just giving everybody equal opportunity, and going forward from there will make everything just a lot easier, and also change a lot of people's minds. The Academy, making them more diverse, because it doesn't make sense that the people deciding what's the highest in the cinema of that year is just a group of predominantly white males. It doesn't really make sense, because we're not seeing a reflection of what America thinks is the best of cinema. We're seeing what this one demographic primarily thinks of cinema. And so it's diversifying that, it's diversifying everything. I said it in the beginning, Jordan Peele, everything that he's doing with his career, going off and giving and highlighting stories and voices that normally just wouldn't get the same chance. What he's doing with Monkey Paw Productions, it really truly is incredible. And I can't wait, because he's so young and he's made such a huge impact just in the past few years. So what he's going to do with uplifting others' voices, that's what it is, uplifting other people's voices. Voices that deserve to be told. And
the fact that he said it too, which I think is even better. I mean, he shows it and he says it, which I think is great. Get Out has had a huge impact. I put it as my number one of the decade. I think that movie's incredible. RB3, any thoughts on the whole idea of the proper representation, or what that means?
Yeah, well, I think, more than leaving it on the responsibility of like actors and actresses, we got to divert responsibility to the uppity ups, right? To like the top executives. And we briefly touched on it before when we talked about the whole Josh Trank situation with Fantastic Four.
Yes.
But if there was a Black executive in that place instead of, a majority of not all white executives, that wouldn't have flown. That wouldn't have flown. And we would see a lot more progress if we see diversity, not just from in front of the camera, but behind the camera, from on top of the camera, from the top down. We need presidents, vice presidents, chief of productions. Like we need all of these like
producers,
positions. Yeah, producers, directors, editors. There's a really powerful thread that I read the other day on Twitter. It was from Nicole French, I think is her name, and it talked about how there was a Black film editor who made a post on Facebook looking to connect other editors, other Black editors together. Because there's severe underrepresentation. And then a lot of white editors went on this post and called him effing racist. This is disgraceful. I'm going to leave this group if you're going to encourage this racism. And it just goes to show this kind of like toxic anti-Blackness that kind of exists from inside of the community all the way down to the editing level. I know even the editor for Moonlight, she won an Academy Award, so if I'm not mistaken, so salute to her. But she was literally doing Moonlight on top of doing another project, on top of doing other things, and like that just goes to show you the struggle that Black people have to have just to break it into this industry. Like it's literally we have to work twice as hard to get half as far, and then when we get half as far, we're met with incredible amount of racism. You briefly touched on how Jordan Peele got backlash for saying that he wanted to cast only Black actors in his movies. Well, bro, like. Literally Woody Allen has all but said the exact same thing about white people. Literally a lot of these Hollywood directors have done nothing but cast white people in their stuff, and there's not even a conversation about it. But it's the fact that we have to lead this charge to understanding that like the power comes from all across the board, from the top down, from the executive level all the way down to the editing level, to the cinematography level. Again, another shout out to Insecure. They kind of revolutionized a lot of the way people thought of lighting Black people and Black actors. I know particularly Insecure and Moonlight did a lot that influenced a lot of the way and aesthetic that we look at Black cinematography right now. But yeah, it gotta come change on all levels and on all fronts.
Yeah, that's an incredible way to end it, man, for sure. I mean, think about Atlanta, right? Think about Donald Glover and what he's done with the freedom that FX is giving him. Shout out to FX for doing that. Yeah, my thing is always from the top down. I have had different chances, and I've talked to you, RB3, about it a little bit with you, Sabrina, but I've told you I've been in rooms with executives, with like big time kind of people, and that stereotype is very true. It is all, and I'm not exaggerating, every single one that I was with, old white guys. And to be frank, like, we have to speak up about this, especially being in Hollywood. The idea that our president came from this Hollywood system, like, bro, like, this comes from the top down. Homies like Trump are the people who are making the movies. Like Trump's friends, like literally they go to Mar-a-Lago and they go to Miami and hang out with him. Those are the people who are helping what we see in the office right now in the White House. And those are the people making movies. Like, we have to say something about it, because there is an ingrained, horrid, racist, systematic Hollywood structure that I feel like us being here in Hollywood have to talk about for sure. So yes, it has to change from the top down, with directors, with creators, with executives, vice presidents. And I know a lot of people, and I'm gonna do this one final thing, just because Get Out is like literally one of my favorite movies of all time. A lot of people praise Jason Blum for being like, yo, Get Out, bro. He like cut Jordan Peele's budget. Like he gave Jordan Peele like literally like $2 million. Like, I've seen like film students get more than $2 million to make an Oscar level movie, like literally, and one of the most profitable movies of all time. So let's not give too much credit to that, because Jordan Peele had to struggle to get his budget. And even then, he talked about it on literally the Blu-ray of Get Out. He said, oh yeah, they cut this, they cut that, they took away my finance for this. And it's like, really? This guy who created Key and Peele had to struggle like that? Like, Key and Peele is one of the best comedy sketch shows of all time. But it goes to show you, even to this day, how much of a struggle it is. And that's why we have to speak up about it, and we have to be the change for sure. And we have to want the change. So either way, guys, that is our episode on Black Cinema Revisited. Hopefully you liked it, you enjoyed it. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think? And subscribe to First Cut if you haven't done so already. You can find me on Twitter at Squad Leader Race,
at Director RB3,
at Sabrina X Monica.
And obviously follow us at First Cut TMO on Twitter and Instagram as well, guys. Much appreciated. We love you guys. For the Meaning of Crew, I'm Andres.
There's RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
We're peacing out. Peace out, guys.